talk about reviews and reclassifications. So this has been around for quite a while, and it's a little bit different this year because we've always had a process in place where we reviewed the top 3 A and open guards. But if somebody was on site from, some would say, the admin team, we could do the review process there and make a determination based on some other factors. But this year it was decided that regardless of what your score was, if you finished in the top 3, you had to send in a videotape. And because of copyright laws, we no longer videotape at WGI shows. So Flow Marching is there, but Flow Marching is a live streaming service. So WGI does not have any recording capability at all. You might remember a few years ago, we used to allow each color guard there was a spot, and we allowed you to videotape your own color guard. And that was called a director's copy. It was an archival copy, and it was for your records. The problem was those archival copies ended up on the internet. So based on the issues with all of the companies that control all the copyrights and then all the lawyers involved, WGI was told, you can't offer that anymore. So WGI does not offer any type of video capability, nor do we do it ourselves. So now what happens, you finish in the top 3 of a show, you have to provide us with a videotape. If by chance one of your parents, staff member, or whatever happened to record something on their phone that we're not aware of, then you can send that in. Or we tell you in the letter that you're going to get that you can send us a videotape from rehearsal. And I'd say about half of the ones that we get come in from rehearsals. So it has to be, in a gym, we need to be able to see everything, just like it would be in a show. And just to give you an idea of the volume of the things that we deal with now, this past weekend we had 8 shows. So we did the top 3 Scholastic A, the top 3 Independent A, so there's 6. So there are 48 groups being reclassified, being reviewed now for possible reclassification. So it happens every single regional, all year long, and it doesn't matter whether you competed 3 times already or you haven't competed yet. So it is going to happen every single regional for all 8 weeks of the season. So I'm sure there's a few skeptics out there right now that are saying, well, you're not going to promote anybody at the end of the year. Well, as recently as a year or so ago, we did promote somebody in week 7. We do look at people in week 8, and it is likely that if somebody hasn't been to a regional yet and we haven't seen them, that there is just as good a possibility that you can get reclassified then as you would if you went early season. In fact, when we start looking at the number of people that have already been reclassified, there becomes a comparison process there. We don't necessarily compare you to who's already been, but the criteria that we use and the video library that we use to compare is the same one that we used when we reclassified them. So it is possible. It's very likely that it is going to get reviewed, and it's likely that you could get reclassified as well. So what is the time frame like? Well, once you get notified by the office on Monday morning, you have 3 days, 72 hours to get us a video, and it takes us about a week from that point. So we tell everybody 10 days. But we tell you it'll take us that long for us to get through. And understanding now that we're looking at 48 plus videos in a week, that's why the time frame can take that long. There's a number of things that go into the reclassification process. So that I also want to explain, and it's that you can be reclassified up or down. So when we look at the top 3 A guards in both Independent A and Scholastic A, we don't necessarily look to go up or down. But once a group goes to a regional, if they feel they are in the wrong class, they can apply to be reviewed to go down. And that happens. We get a lot of those requests during the year. How many of those are granted? I'm not going to discuss percentages, but it happens that groups do get reclassified down. And you can tell just by, if you know certain groups, you all of a sudden see that they went down a class. And we like to think of that as something that's available to people that, they either have good intentions or they were reclassified into a higher class the year before, or they finished in semifinals, championships the year before, which means they can't go down. Once you go to a regional, then you can apply to go down. So there's a number of things that are happening here. In any given week, there's the reviews that we're doing, because of the people that finished in the top 3, but we might have 2 or 3 or 4 that people have said, will you look at us to possibly go down a class, okay? So you finish in the top 3, you provide us with a video, we go through the process of evaluating, and there's a set criteria where we look at, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and how it fits into certain classes. And then the determination is made by 6 people. There are 5 instructors who sit on the steering committee, and then the director of education is the 6th person who votes. So the initial voting is done by 6 people. They get all the information from me. I administer the process. They get all the information from me, and then they vote independently. They do not talk about it. They're not allowed to have discussions about it. They all vote. I collect all the data. I spreadsheet it all. And all I do is notify them of who got reclassified, either up or down. That's all they know. They don't know the votes. They don't know anything about the process other than what their vote was and that somebody got reclassified. Now, if somebody were to appeal a reclassification, and that does happen, there is a process in place. This is all outlined in the policy manual, by the way. If somebody were to appeal a reclassification, it then goes to 3 people, and that's myself, the chief judge, and the CEO. So the 3 of us would look at it separately from the 6, okay? Now, if there was a tie vote initially between the 6, I would break that tie. And if I ended up breaking a tie, I'm not allowed to vote if there was an appeal. So I could break a tie, and then if there was an appeal, it would go on, it would just be the CEO and the chief judge. But in most cases, the determination is made with the first 6, and then there's a 3-person appeal vote. So it can be as many as 9 people who will make a determination on a color guard who's been reclassified and through the appeal process. So what ends up happening after that is really what drives people, I think, and I know it's an unsettling time, but people then say, well, what happens? I have another regional, or in some cases, what happens? I don't have another regional. So let me explain to you what happens. If the schedule for your next regional has already been published, then you have to go on first in the class that you've just been reclassified to. That's the current process, okay? If the schedule has not been published, then you're drawn based on your postmark, just like you would have for a regular regional, okay? It's the same as if somebody applied to be reviewed to go down. The same thing would take place if that happened then, okay? So a group goes to a regional, they get reviewed, they get reclassified. They end up having a regional in 3 more weeks. The schedule's been published. They go on first, okay? If you're in a regional and you get reviewed and you get a letter that says you have not been reclassified, you go to a regional 2 weeks later, you can get reclassified. I mean, you can get reviewed and you can be reclassified up. That has already happened once this year. That's happened in years past as well. How does that happen and why? Well, we all know color guards get better during the course of the year. It's not a black mark against you for going out earlier. In fact, I applaud people who go out early and get their show looked at, get feedback. And Carl and I are going to talk about that a little bit later about the myths associated with going out early, because it really is something that I encourage people to do, because getting feedback from a WGI panel is really to your advantage. But it's possible that as your show progresses and you add on your last minute, or you add uniforms and silks and floor, you add detailing to your show, that the next time, the first time you were looked at, somebody could say, well, they were pretty close. The next time around, you could say, that's definitely an open guard now. So it's one of those things that I tell people, it does not work against you if you go out early. In fact, in some cases, if you go out on week 4 or week 5, or even week 6 and week 7, it's happened in some cases, you're going to get reviewed then. And if you end up having to be moved up to open class, then you're going to have to live with it at that point in the time of the year. The other thing that I think is important to understand is what the steering committee offers for a service to people who get reclassified. So when a group gets reclassified, I assign a steering committee instructor who will work as a mentor and guide them through the transition into the next class. And what that person does is they will take a videotape, the same videotape in many cases, and make 2 or 3 pages of notes that they then give to the unit. And it's just really a guide of how they can take 2 phrases and tie them together and create a longer phrase, how they can add certain things to certain phrases to give it more depth or increase their vocabulary range. There's a number of things that they can do without changing major things in their show. So remember that if they've been reclassified, we already think that they're capable of competing with the middle of the next class. And that's what we look at. We say the general population of the next class. Typically, it's, where was the bottom of semifinals the year before? And we kind of look at where that group was during the course of the year, and we kind of use that as our guide. But that's what we're looking at. So we're not looking at and saying if you get reclassified, you're going to be a finalist. In many cases, that does happen. And most cases, they end up a semifinalist. Occasionally, they end up missing semifinals. It's not a perfect, process, but it does exist that could happen. But the steering committee member will then guide them through that process by not only giving them a set of notes, but then either after they get the notes or after they implement some of them, that steering committee member will then have a phone conversation with that staff or the director or a designer to answer any other questions and go on from there. They're not a staff member. We don't say you can have, one of the steering committee members to be on your staff. We just provide them with a transition. What we're really trying to do is to make sure that they don't, say, okay, make all your 5 6s and all your 6s 7s, and that's what we got to do to compete in the open class, because that's not the case. The show that you already wrote is really already there. We're just going to try and help you take it to the next level. So there is a review process, a reclassification process, an appeals process, and then a mentoring process that we go through with each group. So, it doesn't take away some of the angst, but, and I really do tell people, you should really look at this as a positive. Your kids should be congratulated for what they've accomplished. The design team's done a really good job. And many people will say, I didn't know if we were open array. I was waiting for WGI to tell me. That's okay. Other people just say, oh my God, how could this possibly be? You ruined our year. And that's, what we're kind of hoping is doesn't get relayed onto the kids, because it really is quite a positive experience that they've gone through. I know some people will say we had our heart set on X, but, the next level is a good one to be at too, and sometimes there's positives that can come out of that. So what happens when you get to, you're already entered to go to championships, and now it's time to, you're now put in open class and you're in A class. If you're one of those groups that can't change the tickets that you bought, your plane tickets that you bought, what WGI will do for you on Wednesday, which is now going to be your dark day, is that we will work with you and make sure that we get you some practice time somewhere so that your group isn't there just doing nothing. So that will be the day you get to sleep in, you get to go watch, maybe do some of your souvenir stuff, go support the A class that you used to be in on Wednesday, get in a good rehearsal, and then your prelims and open class will become on Thursday. And then take it from there. Groups that live closer and take a bus might be able to adjust things accordingly. But that's a big part of what we try and do to help through the process. We can't look at it and say, oh my God, we can't reclassify anybody because they already bought plane tickets and they think they're an A guard. We really have to trust people to say we think we're an A guard or we're an open guard, but we know that that's not always the case. So we have to go through a lot of that to make sure that we get people in the right class of competition. There's always that gray area. Some people say, well, the top of A is the bottom of open. Well, our job is to make sure that we get the opens and the A's and A's as best that we can going into championships. And think of it this way, that, if we were to let somebody stay in A because there's really that gray area there, or they've worked really hard, or they've been an A guard for a long time, we're doing just a disservice to the rest of A class by leaving them there, because they really do belong in the next class. Are we going to get everything right? No. Are we going to get everybody up there that needs to be? Probably not, but we don't know how people are going to progress the last few weeks, but groups that are close, and the vote might go just in their favor to be able to stay there, and then they excel and they take off at championships. Well, that's what we have to live with, but it's not a perfect world, and that's the current process, the way things go. So that's the biggest overview of what actually happens in terms of the evaluation process. So I have a question here. Will there be more open class finalist positions considering the amount of promoted groups added during the competitive season? No, there's not going to be finalist positions. Well, I shouldn't say that. All of that is dictated by the number of entries into a class. So the number of prelims determines the number of semifinalists, and the number of semifinalists can determine an increase in the number of finalists. Unless there's an increase that crosses over those thresholds, then no, the number of semifinalists or finalists doesn't change. And we don't publicize how many people have been reclassified up or down. Some people go through the process and figure it out, but that's not always a perfect science either. But it's one of those things where we don't want to go through that. And some people have a misunderstanding of what some of the criteria is we use. We don't look at scores. We don't look at, what one part of the country got versus the other. They don't look at recaps. They don't look at scores. They're told to look at a group and look at what they're doing and how they're doing it, and whether it fits into a certain class. And then that's what they use, based on over a long period of time, they do this much, their vocabulary range is this much. And contrary to popular belief, we're not looking at saying, well, so-and-so got, reclassified and they got a 70. So at two other shows, I've just picked an arbitrary number, 70, we'll just say an 80. So-and-so got reclassified and they got an 80. There was two other shows where a group got an 80, so why aren't they reclassified? Well, the same thing happens. We've had numerous occasions where we reclassified the second place group in a regional and not the first. And it's entirely possible that can happen because they could have a show. They could have a range of vocabulary skills that clearly are open class that maybe they're just not achieving. And somebody could have an A-class show that's written for an A-class sheet, and that's what they're excelling at right now. Whether that would hold up at the end of the year in A or not is irrelevant. But when we look at the second place group, we can say, well, they lost by a half a point, but clearly they're an open class color guard when you look at what they're doing. And then that's why that could happen. So I know some people think that's just, how can that possibly happen? You got it wrong. The judges got it wrong, but it has happened on more than one occasion. So it is something that I think, will happen again in the future. So I think that's a good overview of where everything's at right now. So let me take it to the next step and talk about promotions. The difference between reclassifications and promotions is reclassifications happen during the season. It's not a promotion, it's a reclassification. You pick a class that you want to compete in at the beginning of the year, but we reserve the right to move you to another class if we think you're misclassified. So, we don't do it based on school size, enrollment. We don't do it, based on, any other factor, number of seniors, go through that whole process. We don't. We let you pick the class you want to go to unless you finished in semifinals at championships the year before. And then you have to start out in that class again the next year. There is a process that you can appeal to go back down from there as well. But in terms of promotions, that only happens at World Championships. Top 3 open class in both Scholastic and Independent, and top 5 A class in both Independent and Scholastic. They are automatically promoted at the end of World Championships into the next class of competition, okay? They also sit on the Color Guard Advisory Board, and they become the A and Open Caucus for that meeting in May. So they're automatically invited to the meeting if they choose to come. they become that A&O Open caucus, and they go through the A&O Open proposals, get to sit at the advisory board meeting and speak on, issues there as well. So that happens to those top 3, top 5. It happens at championships. Their appeals process is a little different. If they get to January and they say, we're nowhere near ready to go to the next class, they can submit a video to us, okay, if it's of a completed show, silks, uniforms, floor, etc., and we will evaluate it to see whether or not we think they should be allowed to go back down or whether they should stay there. If we tell them that they should stay there, they can appeal again after they go to a regional, okay? So that's the one thing that they can do. There's an appeal process, but then if we tell them no, there is another way, and that other way is go to a regional and then apply again to go back down. Sometimes things don't change for people, and we can't always predict that. We have to pick things based on, what we're looking. We have to evaluate things based on what we're looking at the time that we look at them. So, it's not easy, but we do want people, because there's an automatic promotion process, that there is an appeal to go down, and then another way that they can be reviewed after the fact. Different than reclassifications, where during the course of the year, we do have to move people around to make sure that we get as many people in the right classes as possible. I'm just taking a look here. Are open class color guards reviewed for reclassification? Yes, that does happen, but it happens in a little bit of a different way. We don't automatically look at all of the open guards. We scan the recaps from those open shows. We look at scores, and the management team within the color guard division splits up, and we all go to different shows. And the steering committee members are often at other shows as well. And that's what happens when an open class color guard is selected for review. It basically comes from a number of factors. It can be while one of us on the management team is looking at competition suite while the scoring is happening. And after prelims, we might say, hey, who's there at that show that can keep an eye on things? Or we might just look at the recap and see the number of judges that had groups in a certain scoring range. And we might say, let's just look at them based on that criteria. We don't say anything over an 80 or an 85 or whatever, but it's during the course of the year when we see scores in relationship to the rest of the country. And if we think there's anything there that we should look at, again, it doesn't mean that they're going to be reclassified. It just means we want to look. So do we look at open guards? Yes, we do. We look at a fair amount of them as well. But it's not something that's automatic where we look at the open guards automatically. A lot of people just like to go into the open class because they want to get out of that A class craziness. But again, that does happen. It's not as often that open guards get reclassified into world class, but it has happened, and it happens during the season as well. So again, they move up automatically at championships. But they have been reviewed and have been reclassified during the course of the year. It's more likely that A guards are going to move up into the open class and that class expands a little bit at championships. Then you're going to see, I've never known multiple open class groups to be reclassified the same year. But there have been many open class groups that have been reclassified during the course of this whole review process, which has been going on for about 10 years, I think, is when we started this whole thing. So with that, let me just say, I'm looking to see, there's another question that just popped in here. How many groups have been reclassified from A to open this season? Jesse, I don't reveal that number, just like I don't tell any of the people on the review committee what the votes were. I don't tell anybody anything other than here's the people that we've done for this week. The people on the review committee could probably go back and take my emails over the first 4, 5, 6 weeks and see how many people have been reclassified. There's been multiple people over multiple weeks. So, people could figure it out if they wanted to try and, see who was entered where. But the other thing that happens isn't just at the WGI level. So that's why it doesn't do us any good. We could say so-and-so was reclassified, so-and-so was reclassified. The circuits reclassify people all the time. We see people that reclassified from regional A to A, but we do see people that are reclassified from A to open at the circuit level. So when we get notified of that, then we have to change their classification at WGI Regionals as well. That's why you get a lot of those emails from us that talk about how the schedule has been adjusted, and to go in and take a look at the adjusted schedule. A lot of that comes from the circuits, and it does come from, our review process as well. But there's any number of those that happen on a regular basis. So the circuits do it, and then we do it, and we have an agreement where we notify them when somebody is reclassified, and they notify us. So just to give you an example, last week we had a group that was competing at one of our regionals. It was their last regional competing. We chose to reclassify them. They had no more WGI regionals. So what we did, we still go through the process and notify the circuit because we review the top three. So the circuit then moves them up and puts them into the open class at the circuit level, even though there's no more WGI shows. It used to be that we didn't, if they didn't have another WGI show, we didn't care. But, the rule says we're going to look at the top three. So that's what we're going to do. And that's how the process goes from there. So if there are any other questions about the AN Open review, reclassification, promotions at the end of the year, fire them off and we'll get to them as the night goes on.